Welcome to the Business Trendsetter podcast, where we talk about trends and how to grow your business. My name is Manny Turan.
And I'm Adam Hartung.
We are Spark Partners. We help companies and entrepreneurs to grow by looking at trends, looking at how to use them to gain more customers. And this week, I want to talk about an old school topic that we talk about quite a bit, and that's the idea of defend and extend. Now, Adam, I know that you and I travel quite a bit. Lately, you've been traveling more than I have. And I know within the next 4 or 5 hours, you're going to be jumping on a plane. And, there's nothing more old school or more defend and extend that can be recognizable than, of course, the airlines. So give us some perspective on how excited you are to jump on a plane and go down to your talk here soon.
Well, I will readily admit that I dislike flying, unless it's an international flight and I'm on business class or first class. Even domestic first class, I just loathe the experience. I'm old enough to remember a time, before TSA, but I can even remember a time when they first put up the radar detectors. I mean, the things you walk through, the metal detectors, I'm sorry. We've evolved, and where we've evolved is not in a good way, right? I mean, back in the day, airlines were highly regulated, and you had a good experience, and then they deregulated, and now it's a terrible experience. And I find it fascinating that people always think that deregulation somehow is going to make everything better. And then frequently they'll complain about the outcome. The increased competition tends to wipe out people that have niche markets, and it tends to be a race to the bottom. And that's exactly what we saw in terms of airlines. I think one of the things that people forget is how much we train our business leaders to behave this way, though. You've heard me give presentations before. Benny, I don't know if you remember, but in 1980, we graduated about 10,000 medical doctors. We graduated about 11,000 lawyers, and we graduated about 12,000 MBAs. You had to go back to 1980, pre-1980, in the late 1970s. I believe that number was
7 years old, by the way.
Yeah. So, and the joke used to be, with 10,000 lawyers, that was too many, right? So let's accelerate the clock up till we get up to 2020, and we graduate now about 12,000 medical doctors in the United States. So barely improved 10% over a very long period, 40 years. We graduate about 80,000 attorneys, and a lot of people think that's way too many attorneys, right? They're looking for work all the time. We graduate now about 350,000 MBAs. 350,000. I don't know if people are aware of just how prolific the business degree has become. And I think one of the reasons for that, if you want to get a post-secondary degree, you got a bachelor's, you want to get a master's, it's the only professional degree you can get without writing some kind of a master's thesis or without having to take a comprehensive exam. I mean, lawyers have to take the bar exam. Doctors have to sit for the board. Heck, even, I always like to joke, barbers have to pass a test. But all you have to do is go to the classes and you get an MBA when you're done. So it's by far and away one of the easiest postgraduate degrees that you can get. But what we do in that is we predominantly teach people, to do things better, faster, and cheaper. Right? Yeah. We don't teach them how to think. We don't teach them how to do, to look at the external world. We don't teach them how to go get external data. The big thing is we teach people how to take a look at finance, how to look at existing customers, how to improve your supply chains, how to buy things better. It's more, better, faster, cheaper. And so whenever we put those people, graduate these people from the MBA programs and we put them into businesses and they move ahead, where are their minds? Their minds are on more, better, faster, cheaper. And that is what leads to what we call defend and extend. In other words, you're not out there looking at customers deeply. You're not trying to figure out what people want. You're not trying to find new ways to use technology. Instead, you're trying to figure out how I can operate my business better, faster, and cheaper. I always like to tell the story about the encyclopedias. They were printing encyclopedias long after CD-ROMs were available. And the encyclopedias didn't transition until, I guess CD-ROMs were almost out of date and we'd already moved to the internet and to streaming and to things like Wikipedia. And the reason was they kept using computers and all the new technology they had to print better books. And so they get locked up in that value delivery system they have, right? And in their case, they were selling information. They were selling knowledge. But they sold it, the medium, the delivery system they had was books. But as time went by, the company got to where all the leadership of the company came up through production. The people that had made better books. So that by the time they see new technology, like a CD-ROM, they're thinking, how do I use the computer or the CD-ROM memory, all this technology, how do I use it to make a better book? Rather than saying, hey, could this be an entirely new value delivery system? They don't think of it that way.
Just as some clarity for those listeners and viewers that are new to us, there is a difference between value and value delivery. And what Adam's talking about is the value is really what the customer gains from the transaction, and the value delivery is what they get. So they get a book and piles of printed materials, but what they gain is knowledge at their fingertips. And same thing with the CD-ROM. They get a piece of plastic with laser etching on it, and what they gain is, of course, information at their fingertips. And of course, now we've got these devices, these phones and such, which deliver the same thing.
Yeah, so what you see in the case of airlines is they think that what they're doing is they're moving bodies from A to B, and that's all they're thinking about. They're not thinking that what's happening is I want to travel. I want to travel for business, or I want to travel for vacation. And that traveling is a whole experience. It starts when I leave my house and involves everything I'm going to do while I'm away. But the airlines take that one narrow niche and they say, well, okay, we're just moving you from A to B. And then all of a sudden you're nothing but a box. You're the same thing as the U.S. Post Office moving a letter or a box, or somebody in the agriculture business moving a steer from A to B to get it slaughtered. And so the mindset just becomes, how do I do it cheaper, right? Then the word better in their mind doesn't become giving the customer a better experience. It's like, oh, could I squeeze another quarter inch out of that seat space so I could try to stack another seat in there? Because better to them is more people on the plane. How more, better, faster, and cheaper is, how can I get you to do things my way? We used to joke when I got started in business, it was who could be the last one to leave the office and still get on the plane before it took off. I mean, literally we'd show up at airports 10 minutes before the flight was going to take off, run through the metal detector, and be the last one to walk onto the airplane. What's happened now is the airlines have managed to get us to the point we have to show up an hour and a half early. Why? Well, they've managed to produce a system whereby I have to get through TSA, then I have to get to my gate, and then I have to queue up to get on the plane. If I don't get in the queue early, then I'm not going to get my bag onto the plane. And they tell me if I'm not sitting on the plane 15 minutes before takeoff, before the scheduled departure time, I won't be able to get on the plane. Now, why they say that the departure time is 10:30 if I have to be on the plane by 10:15, I don't know. Why don't they call it 10:15? Because what they want is to get it's all about how to make their job easier, right?
Well, so a good example of these companies that are training us. When was the last time you were at a grocery store, Adam?
Oh, I go to the grocery store pretty much every week. I was at one yesterday.
How many tellers, how many checkout people were there versus self-checkout situations?
Right, and you're absolutely right. There was 2 people running lines, and there were 8 of the self-checkout lines, right? I have a really good, last week I had some, it was Thursday, and I had an errand I was going to run, and I went there, and I got there early, okay? So I had like 20 minutes to kill, and I wasn't going to drive all the way home and kill it. There was a grocery store right next door. I thought, okay, there was this one item I wanted to pick up. I go in there, and I said, you know what? Grab a beer, Adam, and, go sit down and enjoy a beer while you're waiting for 20 minutes. So I go to the case, I get the beer, I go over to check out, and there's one person that can check people out. And there's this line, they've got like 4 shopping carts in this line. And then there's, as you said, 8 of these self-checkout items. The only problem is I'm not allowed to take an alcoholic beverage through self-checkout, because obviously you don't want people underage buying cigarettes, tobacco products, and alcoholic products. So you say, okay, you have to stand in the line. I stood and I looked at this line of all these people, these carts, and I realized it's going to be 20 minutes standing over there. So I set the can of beer down right there on the shelf by the checkout, got the one item I wanted, walked outside, sat and looked at my email for 15 minutes. So What happened was the grocer lost a sale. Now, he probably doesn't care that he lost a $3 or $4 beer sale, but this happens all the time. You start saying, hey, do I really, do I want to go to the grocery store? Probably not. It's not a fun experience. And then, the irritating examples of trying to check out and you run into problems. You're trying to get the self thing to work. Like if there's no little sticker on the vegetable, then you have to look the vegetable up on a table and you have to, make sure you've got the right one. It's got 5 cucumbers on the screen, and you're like, why do you have 5 different cucumbers up there? This is the cucumber I bought. How do I know which one of those 5 on the screen is it? So the more better, faster, cheaper isn't making my experience better. It's about the grocery store making the experience better for them according to the metrics they use to measure the store, right? So back again, what you started with, Manny, is the real deal. It's what's your value proposition to the customer? Why should somebody buy something from you? Why should they spend money with you rather than spending money with somebody else? What is it you give them? And in many cases, people don't think about that anymore. They don't sit there and say, why did somebody want to do business with me? And they'll come up with answers that are more, or it's better, or it's cheaper. Cheaper is usually the biggest one. When I talk to business leaders, they'll say, well, my product is cheaper. Or they'll try to say, I give better customer satisfaction, or it's a better experience. And I'll say, oh, really? Did your customers tell you that? Do you have surveys that show that? Are you able to price a premium because you have better customer satisfaction? No. So what's happening is you're doing more, better, faster, cheaper. Then you make this up as to why people ought to do business with you. And did you go ask them? Did you talk to them? Do you watch them use your product? Do you really try to understand what is it they're trying to solve? Where does your product fit into this, right? What do you do that would make them happy? Or, are you making their life convenient, and are you making their life, better?
And those lines of questions, Adam, are I think, just have to be asked. And so many businesses, like you said, they don't do that. They think that they know. They think that because they're in business and they've got decent sales, that they're giving and delivering the right value to their customers and all that. But very, very rarely do they actually ask their customers. They don't do surveys. They don't have that 360-degree survey. And if they do, they ask all their family members or neighbors or buddies who are going to give them raving reviews, when in fact the hard question is, let's ask the customers that could take it or leave it, right, at that stage, because they're going to be the bellwether that'll tell you what you're doing wrong and what you're doing right.
So, Clayton Christensen, I worked with him some, and he gave me a lot of great ideas and helped with my development of my thinking around customers. And Clayton used to say that in her divine wisdom, the ultimate creator gave us unlimited number of facts and data points about the past, but absolutely not even one fact about the future. And therefore, we relish in studying the past. We relish in looking in the rearview mirror to see what we did, and what worked, what didn't work, and how we could try to improve on the past, rather than trying to look out and say, what's the future going to be like, and what could the future be, and how would I make it a better place? And then think about this one. So we start, and again, I want to go back. It starts with education. What do we teach people when we take them through an MBA program, or we take them to a bachelor's degree, a BBA program in many colleges? We're teaching them the basics, and then we're teaching them how to look at the past to try to figure out how to make things better. And I talk to people and I'll say, hey, when you're doing an interview and somebody comes in, do you ask them, what would you do to destroy my business if you had unlimited money? Or do we ask them, tell me something, what do you think is the weakest part of my business? Or do we ever ask them, where do you think our customers are going to be in 5 years? No, we don't ask those kinds of questions when we interview people. We'll typically say, what are you going to do to make me more money? So if the candidate walks in and says, you know what, I have experience in supply chain, and I've noticed that you're doing this purchasing and you're getting these parts from these different places around the world, and here's a better way to do it. Here's a better way to buy, or a better way to use the shipping system. And if I do that, we could probably save you $400,000 a year. And the answer is hired. Hire that guy immediately. He's not going to cost $400,000. If I hire him, then he saves $400,000. That's good for my business. So what are we doing? We're hiring people to try to optimize the business we have. We don't really hire people to say, how do I get to the next place I want to be? Yeah. How do I migrate my company to a future that's going to be more successful for my customer? You can imagine if
That's
you were an
interesting too.
encyclopedia company, they've hired all these people that know so much about buying pulp and paper and, how to do printing and how to do page makeup and bookbinding, all this stuff related to that they know. But if you said, how many, were they bringing people in saying, do you think there's going to be a point in the future where people don't need books? And if so, what would
Well,
that
those
look
are the questions that need to be asked, but it's a lot like rearranging the chairs on the Titanic. People are worried about these things, right? And they're not worried about the iceberg that's down the way.
Well, that's very true. It's very true. And we can see this. I think I told you the experience I had recently. I was working with an investor company, and they had invested in an operation. And when I met with them, I asked them what they did, and they said, well, we deliver gasoline wholesale to small and independent convenience stores. So, meaning some convenience stores got 100 branches, then no, they're not. But if somebody has one, or they have 5 or 10 or 15, then what happens is they say, we make your life easy because we monitor the gasoline in the tank. We decide when we'll show up. We keep the tanks full. We make sure that you got plenty of gasoline to deliver people. And so they said, that's a great business. And I said, well, what are you going to do whenever we're dominated by electric cars, by EVs? What are you going to do when half the cars going down the road are electric vehicles and they don't need gasoline at all? And the president of the company literally looked at me with no idea how to answer the question. No idea at all. Hadn't even considered that future. And I said, you do know California's already passed a law saying that by 2030 you cannot sell new internal combustion engine cars. By 2035 you're not going to be able to sell new internal combustion engine trucks. So by 2035, every vehicle sold in the state of California, which would be the world's 6th largest economy, is going to have to be an EV. Well, what it says is that the future for these gasoline distributors is already predetermined to be a death row, right? You know you're going down there. And yet the fellow that ran the company hadn't even thought about it. And what was even more surprising was the investor that was deep into this company hadn't thought about it either. So here they are looking around, they see the Teslas and they read about EV car development, but they're not at all thinking about what does that mean for the future and what's going to be the impact on my business. And they kind of looked at me and they said, well, what do you think we ought to do? And if they really wanted me to pull an answer out, like, go do here, out here, they wanted me to produce an action plan. And I said, I think you better sit down and figure out what it is that you want to do. Because the things that made you a good wholesale distributor of gasoline might make you good at something else. But I don't know that. And I have to sit down and say, what is it the customer values? And if all the customer values is that you get the gasoline to them on time and they never run out, then you don't have a very strong value proposition. No. Because when they don't need the gasoline anymore, you're going to be just like the guy who used to do horseshoes, the old livery stable. Whenever people didn't ride the horses anymore, then there was no need for the livery stable. And the only place we see a blacksmith is in the movies.
Yeah, it's like boiling a frog, right?
Right.
It's like boiling a frog one degree at a time. By the time they know it, they're done. Their goose is cooked.
So what we're seeing when we look at a lot of companies is, in fact, they don't know their value proposition to the customer, right? They don't know what the customer really wants to buy. And as a result, they just keep doing more of the value delivery system. Right now, today, I'll give you what I think is a great stark example, and that's the difference between GM and Ford. And right now, Ford is pretty beat up. A lot of analysts don't like Ford. There's a lot of negative press about Ford. Why? Well, because in 2018, Ford said, we're not going to sell sedans anymore. And remember, they'd had the Ford Taurus, which for 40 years had competed, with Toyota and the Camry, which is the most volume car sold in the world. And they had a lot of sedans. And industry analysts and industry leadership said, how could you be an auto company and not sell sedans? And what they said was, look, the world's changing. We've got some very, specialized vehicles, like the Mustang, and we've got light trucks and heavy trucks and SUVs. And those markets we're doing still pretty good in. But the world is changing. And with the world changing, we've got to change. And again, they were hated from 2018. We saw the importance of that in March of this year. In March of this year, they split Ford into two companies. There's now a Ford Blue, which sells internal combustion engine cars, and there's a Ford E, which is making and selling electric vehicles. And what that is saying, look, we see the future. We don't know how fast it's going to go from ICE to E. We don't know. But what we're going to have is we're going to compete. And so our company will compete out there. And as long as the ones making internal combustion can compete and make money, they can. But we're going to set free the people making the electrics to compete with them, to try to accelerate the electric car market, to try to make it a better spot. And they brought out the Mustang Mach-E, and they've brought out the Ford Lightning pickup, which are considered the two best domestic manufactured cars, electric. Other than Tesla, set aside Tesla, kind of in a world of their own. They have such a high market share. But if you get beyond Tesla, these are the two best cars. Now look at GM. What has GM done? Lots of talk, lots of promise. It says it's going to go forward. It says it's going to be in the electric market. But where do you see it in how the company's organized? Where do you see that they're redirecting their resources to the future? Where do you see how they're making preparing for a wholesale change in terms of the way we treat transportation? You don't see it at all. And that's because, again, they're still stuck. GM is stuck in its old model. And until they change that, I don't think they have much hope. But I think Ford's got a very good probability of being successful.
Yeah, and I think that's oftentimes a relic of, quote unquote, they're too big, they're a giant, tanker that can't turn on a dime. And I think that there's a shred of value to that statement. But the majority is, if a company really wants to make some bold moves like Ford did, like Facebook does, and like Apple does, and even Microsoft, of course, we've talked about them in the past, how they made a bold move. And by doing so and moving away from the PC business and the Word and Excel and all that, and moving towards cloud storage, that they were able to make a shift that's taken them in the right direction. I think you're right.
I hate to belabor the auto story, but I'm going to. If you went back to the 1970s and early 80s, the head of GM was a guy named Roger Smith. And Roger Smith looked out and said, you know what, the auto industry is not fun. And it's going to get a lot worse. Toyota's coming on, Honda's coming on. We see Mercedes and BMW and the manufacturers from Germany are going to keep infiltrating the United States. We're losing share at GM. We're definitely having a hard time maintaining. We've been 50% of the market. We're now down to about 40%. It's probably going to get smaller than that. He says, I don't know why I'm going to keep competing in this bloodbath. And so Roger Smith does some amazing things. He says, where are the growth markets? Well, he saw that air traffic was growing, and he bought Hughes, which was an electronics company, aircraft electronics company. He looked at the amount of data processing going on just inside of General Motors and the number of computers that they had. And he looked at the amount of computer technology that was going into cars. He said, you know what, computers are a big thing. And he bought EDS and made that part of General Motors. And then he said, you know what, the way we sell cars at Chevy and Pontiac, so it's old school and I don't like it. And he creates a new car company called Saturn. And he says, hey, you guys go off into Ohio, and you can create a company of your own brand, your own manufacturing, your own dealers, your own everything. And GM became an exciting place, and it grew, and its value got considerably higher. And Saturn was a very, very, very popular car. I mean, our audience is probably too young to remember it, but when Saturn was launched, it wasn't given much hope, but yet it turned out to be very popular. And one of the big selling points was that when you went into a Saturn dealership, there was a price on the car, and you didn't haggle, you didn't negotiate. And people that didn't like negotiating loved that. They didn't want to spend a day in a car dealership, going through the rigmarole that it was really prevalent at the time, and then not know whether or not you got a good price on the car. At the end of the day, you just didn't know. So they said they loved this idea of fixed pricing, and they loved the idea that there was 5 years of maintenance that was covered when you bought it. So you just take it in and get the oil changed and those things. And so Saturn was extremely popular. It had a loyalty base up there with the very best, like Subaru kind of loyalty.
Subaru and Volvo and stuff.
Yeah. And so, but eventually Roger Smith retires. And when Roger Smith retires, the new guy comes in. His name was Greenfield, I believe. Started with Green. I remember that. And anyway, Green, he comes in and he says, you know what? This is just too complicated. It's too messed up. So he spins out Hughes, calls it GMH, gets its own stock, it goes away. He spins out EDS to another company, calls it GME, gets its own stock, gets rid of that. And he literally calls up Saturn and says, no more of this standalone crap. From now on, you're going to share parts. We're not going to let you make your own chassis, engines, and all these other things. He says, that's ridiculous. You're going to share parts. And you're going to sell your cars in our dealerships. And you're going to sell Chevys and Pontiacs in Saturn dealerships. This idea of you standing alone is ridiculous. Well, it killed Saturn in about 2 months. And so then what we saw was the GM that Roger Smith created, which was an exciting company that built on the future, goes away and the company reverts back to being the GM that it's stuck in to this day, right? So it is possible to look into the future and change your company. And then Roger Smith demonstrated that. We've seen it in Netflix, right? Netflix started off delivering DVDs and VHS tapes to your house, and they were logistics experts. But they knew that their value proposition to the customer was delivering entertainment. And they were very clear, we deliver entertainment. So after they beat back Blockbuster, then what's the next show? What's the next game? And the industry analysts all said, oh, you need to go after Amazon. That would be the trick. You got to go after Amazon. And they were like, why? They said, well, look at all the knowledge you have about logistics. And they said, that's just how we deliver value. Our real value is we understand entertainment. We understand what people want in the field of entertainment. And so what we're going to do is we're going to not go after Amazon, but rather just the opposite. We're going to get rid of all these logistics experts. We're going to bring in a lot of technology experts, and we're going to convert from sending people movies through DVDs to sending them movies over the airwaves, in other words, streaming. We're going to become the streaming leader. And they were reviled. The stock lost 85% of its value. Analysts all said it was the dumbest thing they'd ever heard of. But look what happened. It turned them around, right?
And that's the kind of bold leadership that's required.
Sorry? Go ahead.
That's the kind of bold leadership that's required.
Yeah. I mean, the issue is, do you know your value proposition? Hey, I understand entertainment. I understand customers. I know what they want. I'm going to give it to them. And then are you willing to change your value delivery system? Are you willing to radically modify it? So in the case of encyclopedias, should have brought in some tech people, should have put the encyclopedias on CD-ROMs, should have put the encyclopedia on the internet. They should have been early leaders in, coming up with a new value delivery system. But instead, the people have been educated around how to do more, better, faster, cheaper, delay. They sit back and say, I don't think I want to do that, right? I don't really want to go into that new value delivery system. I don't understand it. I don't know it. It looks risky to me because I don't know it. And so therefore, I'm going to delay. I'm going to wait. And I'm going to say that customers don't want it. But what I'm really saying in my heart is I hope they don't want it, because I don't know right now if they're going to want it in the future. And I'm not going to try it. I'm not going to experiment. I'm not going to test. I'm just going to stay here doing more of what I've always done. And so the worst case, whenever the experimenter comes along, the woman or man that replaces them reverts it back, takes the company back to the place it used to be. But the Netflix we have now, not only do they stream the entertainment to your home, they make it, right? So when they started making
they're now the world's largest media company.
Sorry?
Yeah. They're now the world's largest media company by far.
Yeah.
Netflix.
So but the same thing happened when they said, look, streaming other people's content isn't going to get us anywhere. We got to have our own content. So they set up, the Burbank studios, and they start making their own, and they go to the Cannes Film Festival where people, premiere these releases, and they pay the most of anyone to get these shows. And the industry pundits were all like, this is really stupid. You don't know what you're doing. Well, the fact was they did know what they were doing, because they did know their customer, and they knew where their customer was headed, and they were able to come out immediately with shows that were wildly successful. But when I go talking to business leaders, I'll ask them that question, what's your value proposition? And oftentimes they'll define it around their value delivery system. They'll say, I build houses, or I make concrete blocks, or, I'm a plumber, and so therefore I fix leaks. And that is a totally wrong answer, because that's what you do. It's not the value you have. So why would someone hire you? What's the real value? What is it the customer wants? And then how can you give them what they want? And it has profound implications. I mean, with the global warming that we're having today, we're seeing that simultaneously you have droughts in large parts of the world and floods in large parts of the world. Recently we had a situation where Texas went through like 90 days of the hottest, driest weather they'd ever had, followed up with like a 9-inch rain. Then it flooded all the land that had been parched just before that. We simultaneously saw that there was the western United States, where you and I spend our time, is in like the 20-year drought, and it just doesn't seem to get any better. Meanwhile, the entire country of Pakistan, a third of the entire country is underwater, displacing millions of people, killing thousands. So the world is changing. But you sit there and say, okay, what is the water utility doing? Are they preparing for long term that we would have this kind of situation? Lake Mead is starting to get empty. The reservoirs of California and Arizona are getting really, really low. But of what happens is we often don't want to do anything until it gets to the point of no return, until you turn on the tap and there's no water there. So we're not taking into account looking at what's happening in the world and bringing that down into all of our lives, meaning what's happening with the regulators, what's happening with utility companies, what's happening with, our plumbers. Whenever a plumber comes to your house, do you go for the cheapest solution or do you go for the one that's going to use the less water? A lot of people go for the cheap one.
It's going to change.
And the reality is what are you going to do then if you have to reduce your water consumption because they put a valve on your house, and when you hit a certain amount of water, you don't get any more. You're going to be limited in how much you can get. So
these things are on the horizon, and you got to be aware of them. Adam and I talk about this all the time. We have our course. We do consulting. If you have an executive group, you want us to come in and really ask these tough questions. It really, at the end of the day, becomes more of a internal issue between you and your team in being able to accept these things. I mean, we deal with leaders all the time that we present them with these things, and they say, no, that's not going to happen in my company. And then lo and behold, 2-3 years later, they're on the ropes, and then they end up going down.
I mean, I would challenge all of our listeners and our viewers. We have a course about lock-in and how to manage lock-in, how to recognize if you're locked into an old business model and defending it and extending it. The course is what, $80, Manny? Is that what we charge for that now?
$100.
Okay. That's what it would cost for you and a colleague to go to lunch. And so why wouldn't you turn around and go get that one course and just start answering the questions in the course? Let it challenge you. Let it challenge your mind. And if you're comfortable, you can answer the questions, and then you're looking to the future. But if you start finding these questions difficult to answer, then you obviously have a problem. And, for that kind of money, why wouldn't you give it a try?
Very well said. All right. Thank you, Adam, for your time. And for all those business owners and executives and leaders, start asking those hard questions internally about your business and about your customers. And as always, Adam, looking forward to next time. Any final thoughts for our listeners?
I just hope people will start to look outside more and study their navel less.
All right. Take care, Adam. Cheers.
Thank you.